While we're getting set up and ready to begin, we would love to invite you to share with us in your Zoom chat where you're calling in from. And in the event that you are calling in with your organization today and learning with them, we would invite you to share with us what your organization is so we can give you a shout out. We would love to hear from you. So as we begin, a few technical considerations. We do have a very special guest today, Rochelle from Root, who is going to serve as our chat host. And throughout today's event, she will be asking you some questions and engaging with you, and she'll be voicing your questions to Jim and Rich during today's event. So thank you to those who are calling in. I see some folks in Toledo, Ohio. So one unique aspect of today's webinar is that Rich and Jim are located in Sylvania, Ohio, just about a 10-minute drive from our office here in Lambertville, Michigan. And I think maybe some from this area are calling in. I'm seeing folks from across the country and around the world, and we are so thrilled that you've decided to join us. So another way that you can engage with us today is by tweeting your thoughts about the content live on Twitter. You can use the hashtag #LeadershipBlindSpots. Like the title of the book, and we would love to engage with you there. A few more things. We will be starting a recording in a few moments, and we can make that recording available to you later. We also have questions from time to time about the slides. Today's slides will not be available. However, we will have a handout for you about today's content. I wanted to remind you also to please send your chats to all panelists and attendees so that you can engage with one another during today's event. So again, to recap, we will be recording today's event. We will have a handout of today's event, but not these exact slides. And our hashtag for today's event is #LeadershipBlindSpots. So Rich and Jim, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Becky.
Sure. So before we dive into today's event, I am going to share with our attendees a little bit about you, Jim and Rich, and then we'll turn this presentation over to you. So Jim Haudan is the co-founder and chairman of Root Inc. And Root has been around for so many years, making a tremendous difference in this area of organizational change. And Jim does have another book that you may have seen in the past, The Art of Engagement. And Jim is a sought-after speaker. He has spoken at TEDx, BGSU, Tampa TEDx, and at conference board events. So Rich is the CEO and Chief Client Fanatic at Root, and he's helped align leaders at Global 2000 organizations to drive strategic and cultural change at scale. Under Rich's leadership, Root has been voted among the Great Places to Work Institute's top 25 places to work. I absolutely love coming to the Root offices. And he, also under Rich's leadership, Root has been listed among Inc. 5000's fastest growing companies. So these two gentlemen have tremendous credentials, and we're thrilled to be able to learn with you today.
Thank you, Becky. And welcome everybody, and thanks for joining. We're excited to share some of the content and lessons from our book, and I hope would be that by the time this is all said and done, you at least have one or two key takeaways from how you might lead or how leadership can be even more effective within your organization. But let me set a little bit of context. Going back to 1799, where George Washington was 2 years removed from office and working on his estate in Virginia on a rainy day when he caught a bad cold. And a believer in bloodletting that evening, he was sending for physicians, but a believer in bloodletting, he asked his estate overseer to conduct just that. And bloodletting, for those of you who don't know, is taking a sharp object and opening up the artery and ultimately putting a certain amount of blood from your body into a bucket with the fundamental belief that it would rebalance kind of the core elements, four humors they call it, within your blood count. The following day, 3 physicians showed up to ultimately help him improve and trying to determine his condition. The only thing they continuously did throughout that day was 4 more sessions of bloodletting. By the end of the evening, George Washington said, "You know, I feel myself weakening, friends, and I don't think there's anything more we can do. And thank you for the good work done. And a little after 10 p.m., he passed away. Now, physicians and researchers are still debating exactly what killed a man who was still in very good health at age 67. But one thing is for sure, they had removed 40 to 50% of his blood within 24 hours through the act of bloodletting. And that certainly didn't help. Now, you might ask yourself, how could somebody that brilliant, a founding father, the first president of the United States, think that that was a smart thing to do? And that is a great question, right? How would we ever think that was something that was reasonably normal and rational? But there's more stories. Let me give you a couple more examples, because you might go, that was 200 or 300 years ago. Well, let's go to about 1895. Kind of a rather jolting example is the use of cocaine as medicine for everyday kids' ailments. Here's an ad that ran in 1885 for cocaine drops for toothaches for children. Yes, this really happened. The medicine not only relieved pain, but it also promised to lift the mood for children. And you can just imagine the dialogue that might have happened back then between parents. Honey, Annabelle seems to be a bit cranky, not herself today. Oh, no worries, dear. Just slip her one of the cocaine drops in the cupboard and she'll be off and running in no time. Right? It all seems a little absurd with the benefit of hindsight. Let's do a couple more. Smoking, probably the most well-known example of where our beliefs have changed profoundly over the past 50 years or so. Prior to that, our attitude towards smoking was quite different. Smoking was socially desirable, did not raise meaningful health concerns, and was as commonly as drinking a glass of wine was with dinner today. Shockingly, as you can see, dentists and doctors were frequently used as pitchmen. Looks a little absurd now, but back then, rather hard to believe. But today, rather hard to believe that that was the way to go. Let's do one more real quick, because you might go, well, that was 50 or 60 years ago. Let's go to the early 60s and 70s. We've become much more conscious today about carbonated soft drinks and their impact on our health. The link between sugar and childhood obesity is obviously well established today, but back then, the competition was for who could possibly start the process earlier of getting your kid to do carbonated sugar drinks. So as you see here, why we have the youngest customers in the business for 7-Up, or for better start in life, start cola earlier, right? Now you might be shaking your head and you might be going, that is ridiculous, right? And that is absolutely correct. I think there's many things that in the benefit of hindsight, we find ridiculous, but back then they seemed perfectly normal and even the thing that was desirable and perfectly acceptable by society. And so the point of all of that is ultimately the things that seemed ridiculous today, were perfectly acceptable in the past. And we know that happens for leadership. That happens in leadership elements as well. And so I think this is a chat opportunity, Rochelle, right, where we want to get some feedback from the group on where, what are some other examples where things that seemed ridiculous, maybe ridiculous today that seemed perfectly normal today.
Yeah, we do, Rich. So I'm glad you guys have chosen to engage a live audience, and we certainly want to meet them where they are and let them have a voice. So, oh, good. We've already got them coming in. You guys feel free to use the chat. Make sure that you're chatting to all panelists and attendees. My name is Rochelle, and I'll be watching the chat and serving as your voice throughout this event. So the question is, what are things we do today that we may look back on in disbelief later? We've already got some great ideas coming through, guys. I want to let you know what they are. What about not putting babies in car seats, like letting them stand? No seat belts, riding bicycles without helmets when we were younger, riding bicycles barefoot. Yes. And even smartphones for kids. That might be something we eventually look back on and say, time out, that may not have been the way to go. We're understanding this idea that there are things that later we might look back on and have some not knowing about it, Rich.
Absolutely.
So let's take off where Rich left, and that is this whole issue of blind spots. And so traditionally, the phrase blind spots referred to part of the retina that is insensitive to light, which resulted in an actual spot in the eye where people can't see. Blind spot is also a phrase that's often used when the side mirrors of a car creates a space to the left and right where your vehicle, where you can't see cars passing or driving next to you. Both of those are good examples. Just as we have visual blind spots and driving blind spots, we have found in our 20+ years of working with many of the largest companies across all industries around the world that there are leadership blind spots. We define leadership blind spots as areas where our existing beliefs and experiences preclude us from having the most enlightened view of how to lead people most effectively. I want to repeat that again. A leadership blind spot is an area where our existing beliefs and experiences preclude us from having the most enlightened view of how to lead people most effectively. It is our strong conviction and our experience that there are 5 leadership blind spots that hold most leaders back from being effective in leading their people. I would even suggest, and I think Rich and I suggest together, that these leadership blind spots perpetuate disengagement and indifference in most of our workforces. The consequence of these blind spots on the execution of our strategies and the engagement of people are profound. Simply said, 90% of our strategies are not well executed, and 70% of our people are not actively engaged in many ways because of these blind spots. Both of those statistics are just mind-numbing. When you think of 90% of what we set out to do as teams and as communities of people never materialize, and 3/4 of our people don't show up with the best skills and capabilities that they have to offer, something must change. Each of the 5 blind spots are supported by outdated leadership beliefs that are just as ridiculous as cocaine cough drops for children or carbonated soft drink laced formula for babies. It is our hope that in bringing these blind spots to life and to your attention, that we can challenge and change the way we lead people. It is our promise that we can provide insights into the 5 leadership blind spots that can transform the way you lead your people. We have simplified the categories to just several critical areas. Those areas are purpose, story, engagement, trust, and truth. Rich, why don't you kick us off on the purpose blind spot?
Yep. Thanks, Jim. And so think about these as the leads we ultimately want you to challenge. And so the first one, it's not purpose. We know purpose has grown in popularity significantly. And just about every organization we work with these days is focused on creating a purpose statement, has a purpose statement. But ultimately, the blind spot we see time and time again is that purpose matters, but it doesn't drive our numbers as a core belief. All right, and so we've got little vignettes here that sort of kind of play out the point that we'll let you process for a second. But a couple of stories to illustrate that. You know, we were working with the CEO a few years ago, and he was in the latter stages of his career and wanted to set up his organization for the future and kind of create a legacy. And so he really wanted to be clear on the purpose of the organization and be more purpose-driven. You know, he kind of did focus groups, brought in another consultant. They did a lot of the work to get really clear on what sits at the heart of purpose, and so on and so forth. But as all that was happening, the numbers started to feel some pressure. There were some quarterly results that weren't kind of going their way. And we were sitting at dinner, and he said, hey guys, purpose work is important, but we hit some headwinds, and it's time to really focus on the operations of the business and get the numbers moving again. And then we can get back to our purpose once we have things under control, right? And while that's kind of a seemingly innocent comment, it really speaks to the core belief that focus is not an important performance driver for the business, right? And that it's something that a company only focuses on when things are going well or when we have extra time on the agenda. And people see through that, right? And one other quick example, we were working with a company, global company, focused on quality and safety standards in our water, food, and consumer products. So the stuff that we all eat, drink all the time, and they had some issues in engagement within their organization. And they had a hypo group that they had investigated, and then they came to our offices with the CEO and his team to dive into it. And I'm going to show you the actual first slide that they kicked the meeting off with, minus the logo removed, obviously. But you kind of see here the increased revenue versus saving babies. The link is not clear, right? Now, this is actually an organization who is in the business of saving babies. And they struggled to draw the connection to how do we embed that in how we run our organization. And in our experience, leaders are reluctant to place the existing belief that purpose and profits are largely separate endeavors. One is seen as soft and something to tell stories about, and the other is to build corporate pride and connectivity, right? And that's just, in the long run, not a good recipe for success. As a matter of fact, if you ask most folks in organizations, 90% of your folks understand and know that the company gets the importance of purpose. Yet less than half of them think that your organization is run in a purpose-driven way. That's a big deal, right? Because that gets at the underlying belief of how important purpose truly is to your organization. Now we've heard lots of companies say, well, it's different though. We're big and we didn't start it like you see these companies like Seventh Generation and Whole Foods, and and then, well, they might be a little different now that they got bought by Amazon, but you get the point. They started that way. Didn't start that way. This gets a lot more difficult. Well, that's not necessarily an excuse if really you think this is important to your organization. Let's take CVS. CVS was faced with a dilemma when they defined their purpose as helping people on their path to better health. Selling cigarettes becomes a challenge to that purpose, right? And so they decided in 2014 to discontinue. Now, for CVS, that was a rather big decision because sales for them of cigarettes made up $2 billion. So that's a $2 billion reduction in your revenue. And I don't care how big your revenue number is, that is a good chunk of change. Now, they wanted to see what impact that might have on their cause and purpose. And they did research where they studied in the markets where they had the largest share to see if they're having an impact on population health. And they found that tobacco sales in those states across all retailers, not just their own retailers, decreased by 1% over an 8-month period. That's a reduction of 5 packs per smoker and an overall reduction of 95 million packs of cigarettes in those states. That is being committed to your purpose. While they lost significant tobacco sales short term, they also gained a lot of respect from many customers and employees because it showed how serious they are about what they stand for. Ultimately, the jury is out. But we would venture a guess that over a 10-year time frame, this was also a very profitable strategic decision that was embraced by CVS employees who felt that there's an authentic commitment to purpose and customers who show a greater degree of loyalty and trust towards the company. As you think of purpose in the blind spot, the question we want you to ask is, are you ultimately creating an organization that focuses on bringing its purpose to life every day, or an organization that is focused on hitting the numbers every day? Realizing that they're not mutually exclusive. It's just, which one do you believe comes first in terms of how you run your business? Rochelle?
Yes, so we've got some really power chatters today, Rich. I'm having so much fun with them. I'm sorry. I'm going to try to feed it as much as I can to you. Here's the question that we want you guys to put in the chat now is, what would you say is your organization's current focus? Where do you think there's focus? I do want to let you guys know, Rich and Jim, that in the chat, we've got a lot of people that feel very strongly about what you're saying about purpose and how it is sometimes secondary. And there's even a little bit of action in the chat thinking that organizations like CVS can go even further into living their purpose. So thank you guys for provoking that. Right now, what we're seeing in the organizations from those of us that are represented on the phone today is results. results, numbers, yes. We do have some people that are focused on the future. We have people that are in healthcare and they're focusing on the nurses and the role that they play. Clients, so we do have a lot of customer-focused people with us today, which will often align with focus. And this is also giving us insight. These chats are also giving us insight as to the organizations that are represented today on the phone. We've got a lot of people that are in customer service, healthcare, all kinds of people that are interested in serving their customers. So I do think we are aligned with the fact that purpose is what motivates us. And we have a lot of comments about that too, guys, that without that, it's really pretty meaningless. We've got some manufacturing people in the house too. But we do agree that there's numbers and that we need to be more focused on purpose because that's what inspires.
Got it. Thanks, Rochelle. Why don't we go on to the next blind spot, since I know we want to make sure we're able to get through all of them. The second one is that we have a compelling story to tell that our people care about. And we know that's often not the case. And once again, you see the little vignettes where the leaders are quite proud of what they've created, and the audience might not feel exactly the same way, right? There's an interesting study that Elizabeth Newton did, a Stanford professor, where she paired people up, and she gave them popular songs that pretty much everybody would know, and she asked one party to tap the rhythm of that song, and then had the other party guess what that song is. And she said, hey, what percentage, she asked them, what percentage of the songs do you think you would be able to guess, right? And on average, they came in at between 40 and 50%. I think I can guess maybe just a little bit less than half, right? And the ultimate answer was 2.5% after she ran all these studies. And people were a little shocked, right? The tappers were somewhat astounded. They said, it was so clear in my mind. You know, how is it possible that the listeners couldn't hear in the taps the rhythm of the song that we were going after? It was really difficult, but it's something that happens to experts or leaders frequently as well. They have a similar experience and a reaction when they set out to share their ideas with people who are not experts in what they're talking about. So they struggle to engage, they struggle to have it make sense to folks. And we see that all the time when it comes to strategy. And probably no better example than a vision statement, right? Which is often meant to be the headline of a story. So if purpose that we talked earlier is all about the why and really making sure you operate that way, vision is all about the larger goal of where we're going from here. What does winning look like? And we had an organization who wanted us to work with them on their vision statements, and they said, kind of do some studies on what some of our peers are doing. And we made some slight modifications here, but this is essentially what their peers were doing and how they had articulated the headline of their story, their vision. And you'll see them there. You know, we'll become the world's most valued company to customers, colleagues, investors, business partners, in the communities where we work and live. Well, that doesn't say much of anything, right? Our vision is to be the world's premier, parentheses, industry company. Simply put, we want to be the best employer, supplier, business partner, investment, and the best neighbor. The reality is that sort of a headline to your story is largely useless, right? And often it's the output of too many people with master's degree being locked in a room with a consultant trying to figure out something that they can all agree on. And so in the end, it sort of makes sense to them and it doesn't make sense to anybody else, right? And ultimately, you have to, what does make a good headline to your story? And it's a couple of different things, right? It's got to clearly articulate what winning looks like. It has to define what uniquely sets you apart from the competition, and it has to create excitement in people to pursue the path, right? If it captures those things, you're off to the races. And while we don't endorse any of the following, we'll just give you a couple of quick examples of a better way to go after that, and we'll give you 30 seconds to read them. And have you sort of guess who that is? Our vision is to create a better everyday life for the many people. Our business idea supports this vision by offering a wide range of well-designed, functional home furnishing products at prices so low that as many people as possible will be able to afford them. Right? So maybe jot down or think in your head, who do you think that is? And then the second one, this company designs, manufactures, and launches advanced rockets and spacecraft. That does limit it quite a bit. The company was founded in 2002 to revolutionize space technology with the ultimate goal of enabling people to live on other planets. The first one is IKEA, and the second one is SpaceX. Now, once again, there's lots of different ways of doing it right, but these are good concepts of articulating what winning looks like, what uniquely sets them apart, and what creates an exciting path to pursue as the headline of your story. So the first question is, how good is your headline when you think of story? The second one is, do we have shared meaning? And so I'm going to ask you a question in a second, and we want to have you imagine what image comes to mind in your head. So close your eyes for a second if you're on the phone. And I'm going to say the word hometown. And you tell me, or you imagine the image or the feeling that comes to mind. Most likely, and having done this many times, is that you had different images in your head about what that looks like, from a small town on Main Street, a large city. Some of you might have thought of family. Some of you might have thought of a meal that rung home, that you ate when you grew up, and so on and so forth. The point being, ultimately, that we all associate different meanings with common words. And so as you think of words that we commonly use when we talk about strategies, words like growth, customer focus, innovation, engagement, we likely agree on the word itself, but when we ask to draw out the meaning of what it really looks and feels like in action, the pictures are often as different as the images we draw of our hometowns. So the second challenge when you think of story is, do we have shared meaning on the story itself? Lastly, how good are you at sharing that story then effectively? And we can't tell you how many leaders we've been with where the presentation, lacks quality, and you hear things like, and I'm sure you've heard these things before. I know there's too much to read on the slide, and you can't read it. I know I'm making you drink from the fire hose, and I could keep going on and on. In the end, there's an ineffective way of sharing the story. And the issue is, not only does the story ultimately not resonate, there's a study that actually will show that the great majority of people develop a moderate to significant negative perception about the ability of the leader to lead. And so great storytelling isn't only about conveying your story, it is about your leadership credibility. So as you think of storytelling and the three components we just talked about, think of the headline of the story and the quality of it. Do we have shared meaning, and how good are we at sharing it? And sharing it is difficult, right? It was 1963 in the March on Washington, and the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement. And there was a two-day get-together, and Martin Luther King was the one who was bringing it to close with the hope of really galvanizing the movement. He had worked with his team at the Willard Hotel the night before and created a 4 to 5 page positioning paper and policy speech. And he started delivering that the next day, but he was losing the crowd because it was a hot day and the speech was heavy on policy, until one of his confidants, Mahalia Jackson, said, "Martin, tell him about the dream." Right? And he started telling all of us about his dream. And the rest is history in terms of how it resonated, how it connected, and how it galvanized the Civil Rights Movement. The point being is, you have to be your authentic self, and you have to practice to be really good at engaging people effectively in your story. And that is the second blind spot. Do we have a story that is compelling, that we have shared meaning around, and we're good at sharing it with our people?
Okay, so Rich, everybody's going to be answering that in the chat. Does your organization have a story that's compelling? And while they're doing that, I want to let you know some of the things that are going on in the chat. The hometown example that you gave was extremely compelling. We had all kinds of answers, some of which you covered, but some that involved like apple pie and relationships and who I am and those I love. And so that really resonated. People also had a lot to say about keeping things short and simple, including vision statements. And there was a request to learn more about vision statements like what you have on slide 19. And then this idea that we have to have shared meaning in multicultural settings, which can make it even more challenging. And while that was being said, you did the MLK story and we got a thumbs up. So this is very good. And I wanted you and Jim to know what was happening in the chat.
Perfect. Thanks, Rochelle. Over to you, Jim.
Great. Thanks, Rich. As we begin to look at the third blind spot, it's true that in most organizations that we've worked with over the years, a tremendous amount of time and money is spent on strategies to win, and then these strategies are communicated. usually with the dreaded PowerPoints at roadshows, town hall meetings, manager conferences, and other sessions. However, employees fail to connect with these strategies, leaders are frustrated at the lack of progress, and managers just try to hold the ship together. The leadership blind spot on engagement and the dangerous misconception about leading people is that rational and logical presentations engage the hearts and minds of people. As you can see from the cartoon sketch, these presentations rarely capture the attention of our people, let alone their hearts and minds. Why doesn't this work? As leaders, we have forgotten what it is like to be sold and told. We have failed to recognize that direct tell and sell rarely works for us. So why do we think it would work for our people? In the words of our people on the front line and managers in the middle, we simply tolerate the conclusions of our leaders and act on our own. There is an aha here that is mission impossible for any message to roll off a leader's lips and connect with the hearts and minds of our people that we lead. It will not happen. I almost want to repeat that again, and that is, it is impossible for any message to roll off the lips of a leader and penetrate the hearts and minds of our people. Yet, in most cases, that's exactly what we still try to do. So the key to authentic engagement and capturing the hearts and minds of our people is to shift from leader presentations to authentic conversations. And as leaders, we must change our inclination to build a PowerPoint deck with bullet points we want to tell our people to thoughtfully considering the conversation questions that best invite our people to co-think our business and identify their best answers to the most critical challenges we face. Let me give you an example. We call it the canyon. In many organizations, when we ask what are the challenges we face, we are quick to hear the same thing. We hear that it's the other guy. They don't get it. If we ask the leaders, it's the managers that don't get it. If we ask the managers, it's the doers that don't get it. If we ask the doers, it's the leaders and managers don't get it. It's the blame game, and it's easy to play. Something amazing happens when we introduce conversation and dialogue. We ask small groups to explore questions with this picture, such as, describe the picture you see. Explore the marketplace tornado. What do you think the leaders see? What do you think the managers see? What do doers see and feel? Why don't we all see the same thing? What can be done to bridge the canyon? People at all levels identify solutions and respond with creative and better answers and reach out for accountability. They are undeniably engaged. The finger pointing takes a vacation. There's a simple principle in play here, and it's called, we want to solve our own puzzles. Often when we talk to audiences, we ask people in the audience, how many of you play Sudoku, or do crosswords, or play video games, or read novels? Many of the hands go up. And then we ask, how many of you go to the answer key before you work the puzzle? And almost no one raises their hand. Well, there's always someone that raises their hand with the novel that reads the last chapter first. But mostly, 99% of the people simply don't do that. And when we ask why not, the answers are quick and profound. They would say, it's not fun. It's not challenging. It can't test how good I am. They even say, why bother? And then we ask the question, what happens when we direct, tell, and sell the rationale of our strategy and script the response for our people? And they sort of give us the answer, why bother? We're not engaged, and we're not asking for the best ideas and responses we have. So how do we move from presentations to conversations and create the genuine engagement in the business? How do we shift from our tendency to build a deck to present, to clarity on what conversations our people need to have to co-think our business and to engage and unleash their untapped knowledge and expertise? To start, skip building the deck and ask yourself what questions set up the right conversation for our people to contribute their talents to our success. Michelle, I think we have a chat right here.
Yes, we do, Jim. So people completely get this visual. They noticed all the things that you pointed out, the chaos. They love the tornado, the lack of responsibility, the finger pointing. There's a lot of hard work going on, but people are siloed. There are some organizations on the line that are having more success with connection than others. And they're just inspiring us to know that this has to be solved. This is a problem statement in this image, and it needs to be solved for.
I think, Rochelle, the key is, and we need to ask our people to step into the conversations to help us solve it.
Good.
Rather than create a presentation on how we think they should behave, act, and take care of it. And again, I think the real question is, how do we move from presentations to conversations and create genuine engagement in the business? And again, I can't tell you how different this would be if a leader would ask not what needs to be on my PowerPoint deck, but what questions do I think we need to architect or create for our people to co-think the business with us and unleash their talents to respond to the challenges most critical to our future. The fourth blind spot.
Jim, I just wanted you to know that there's a lot of reaction to that in the chat. It's the equivalent of a standing applause, so good job.
Great. The fourth blind spot is all about trust. In many cases, we find leaders have a goal. Their goal is to reduce human variability in the name of consistency and predictability. It can reduce risk and enable brand consistency. However, it has a steep price when it comes to calling out the best our people have to offer. If we look at the cartoon, it captures the leadership's desire for people to think like we do, or just do what we tell you. We find that the trust blind spot to be at its core a belief that people will not do the right thing unless you tell them what to do and hold them accountable to do it. And we couldn't be more against this, or we couldn't be more invigorated by what happens when you approach this differently. Even as I read this, now I can tell you how flawed it is and misguided and the blind spot that it is. Hampton Hotels is a perfect example of how to change this blind spot. Hampton by Hilton is one of the most successful hotel brands over the last 30 years. The way Gina Valenti, former VP of Brand Hospitality, tells it, the uniqueness that our people bring to Hampton is what sets us apart. Processes like Six Sigma and Lean work to eliminate variability, but this approach doesn't work when it comes to creating unique guest experiences, because we eliminate the individual touch that only human beings can provide when they have some freedom to be their best self. Human variability is what creates exceptional experiences. We become average at best if we eliminate it. Let me give you one more quick example. A large restaurant chain was frustrated that the average restaurants were doing about 1.2 million a year in revenue, but the high-performing restaurants were 65% higher at 2 million a year. To the leadership credit, they started by taking a look at their leadership and investigating the high-performing restaurants. What they found is that the average restaurants were doing exactly what they were told by corporate. When the company's senior leaders looked in the mirror, they concluded that their approach to running the business was based on control versus trust. Their trust statement read like this: we claim that we are customer maniacs, but in the end, we are finance and control maniacs who don't trust our people would do the right thing for our customers and the business if we took the controls off. They did take the controls off from an extreme perspective and created trust for their restaurant managers to develop people and grow revenue with their own creativity and ingenuity. The following year, thousands of restaurants hit the $2 million revenue mark as they shifted from control to trust. Let me also give you an interesting way to think about the issue of control and trust. In our book, we discuss in detail you need aspects of both, and we call it the combination of framework and freedom, the inclusion of both. Consider the traffic analogy of a roundabout in an intersection with stoplights or stop signs. In the roundabout, the flow is based on trust and self-organization. There are no lights telling you when to stop and when to go. The traffic signal intersection is controlled by a stoplight. The stoplight determines who gets to go, and there are very clear rules. While the roundabout seems chaotic, the fact is that only 16 conflict points exist where the traffic light has 56 points of conflict. There is a significant research that shows when you get significantly faster flows through roundabouts or with trust, and a lot fewer accidents than with a traffic light. In our view, control-based approaches drive conformity and a consistent framework. And trust-based approaches lead to empowerment and freedom. The key is, how do you get an optimal blend of both? One of the simplest ways we have found to maintain control and to encourage freedom and empowerment of people is to consider helping all people and organizations to know the difference between hard lines, guidelines, and no lines. Here it is: trust and control. Phil Cordell has a unique and valuable perspective on this, and his quote is simply, "It is being comfortable with some things you can't control, and that some stuff will get created in the field that you are not proud of. But the reality is, for every one of those, you will get 20 that are way better than anything you could have ever thought of. Plus, it has an energy and a momentum that you never could create in a corporate boardroom or in a training room." The fifth blind spot is all about truth. And all about trust. And the real question is, how can we scale the unique human judgment, discretion, and care of our people while at the same time having firm standards that we all share? Rochelle, I think we were going to do a quick chat on this one too.
Yes, so we've got a lot of people weighing in as you're talking, Jim, and it really resonated, this idea between the roundabout and the regular intersection. So thank you for that. And we all agree that it has to do with trust, and trust is so important. Courage came up a whole lot in the chat. Do leaders have courage? And I know you guys are about to get to that in the next blind spot about courage. I did want to let you know that the question in the chat right now, guys, that we're asking you to weigh in is, what are ways that you allow for human judgment in your organization? Just a quick reminder, make sure that you're chatting to all panelists and attendees. There is some seriously good stuff happening in the chat. You won't be able to see it if you're not sending to everybody that's here today. So thank you, Jim. I think we're sitting pretty and we're ready for more.
Great. All right, let's do the last blind spot, and hopefully we have the time to entertain a couple more questions. If not, we'll certainly address them in other avenues. Last but certainly not least is truth, and it's about, my people feel safe telling me what they really think and feel. Often a desire of leaders. Rarely does it happen effectively in organizations, right? And to give you one story, we were working with a large global financial services organization, and they called us about enhancing the truth-telling, the kind of dialogue that happens at the leadership level. So we said, okay, and we did some interviews to kind of get at the truth and how people felt about the strategy, the culture, the way conversations could be had, and we started to draw that out and created little conversation sessions. And so that the top 120 or so came together and kind of worked through those issues. And it was a very good conversation. We were kind of walking in between the tables where the conversations took place, and people were kind of giving us thumbs up and said, best conversations we've ever had. This is, we've never had conversations like this. But in full disclosure, part of what we created was somewhat critical of the strategy based on the feedback that we heard. And the head of strategy was not all that happy to see it, and ran to the CEO and complained, and things sort of went a little south at that point. And to make a long story short, because we have only 7 minutes or so left, is we got summoned to the CEO office the following day. And he said, you know, it was an interesting session yesterday, guys. You know, we went back to the various folks you interviewed, and they said this content that you came up with did not come from them, right? And so we just wonder where you got it from, right? And we sort of knew that this was a very sort of a moment of truth, so to speak, for that account. And we said, well, it's one of two things then, right? I mean, the first is we've got a vivid imagination and want to cause controversy, right? Or the second is that your people are a lot more comfortable telling us the truth than they are comfortable telling you the truth. If it's the first, you should fire us. If it's the second, we can really help, right? And in his defense, it was sort of quiet for about 5 seconds, which felt like a minute, and then he smiled and said, "Okay, let's talk." And that was the beginning of a multi-year relationship. The reality is, telling the truth and hearing the truth is difficult, right? It just is, for a lot of different reasons. And if we take a look at that from an employee standpoint, it's things like, if I speak up and disagree, will I be the team member who doesn't get to play? Can I be sure my comments will be taken the right way and my intention is for the good of the business? If I talk about things from my perspective, will people think less of me because of my answers? And maybe even the most common, if I say what I really think, could that be a career limiting move? Therefore, I won't, right? And from a leader perspective, I might think differently. Right? Is critique and allowing critique an indictment of my leadership? But what if I don't have all the answers because I'm the leader, I'm supposed to, right? If we really open the kimono, we just have a complaint session. That won't help. It'll just be negative. Or if I'm not comfortable with how vulnerable I have to be if we really put everything on the table. So those are the things that are often the unsaid emotions and fears that get in the way of truth telling. And it's just fundamentally difficult to do. And it's as old as time in terms of a challenge. I mean, back in the Middle Ages, the only person that could tell the king the truth was the court jester, and they used humor and different ways of breaking through. In many ways, you always have to ask, what is the modern version of the court jester? How do we create environments to tell the truth? And there's lots of different ways, some of which you'll obviously find in the book and in more detail. But there's one core piece to think about from a leadership standpoint, and that is, are you leading with authentic power or inauthentic power? Right? Authentic power is, I have more than you do. I know more than you do. I am more than you are. And we've all seen leaders and worked for leaders that led that way. And that is leading by fear and by positional authority versus leading with authentic power, which is about compassion, vulnerability, and empathy, which ultimately creates followership and inspires great work. That doesn't mean in either you don't have to face difficult decisions, but it is, what is your core belief set? And the latter is the one that creates an environment that allows for truthful conversation and ultimately more effective conversations in organizations where good and bad information can travel a whole lot faster. So the question we have is, what can we do as leaders to make it safe for people to tell the truth and act on those truths to make the business better? Because truth telling is a major competitive advantage if organizations can create an environment that truly supports it. So those are the 5 blind spots and the beliefs that go with them: purpose, story, engagement, trust, and truth. Rochelle?
So this is a chance, Rich, for us to see maybe which one resonated stronger than some of the others. We had a healthy bit of conversation around all of them. The question in the chat right now is, which blind spot is most interesting to you? And while people are chiming in on that, I wanted you and Rich to know, I wanted you and Jim to know that there is a question that came through about slide 19, where you cover the vision statement and what makes for a really strong vision statement. If we do have more time today, depending on what comes through the chat, people would like to learn a little more about that. Right now, what's coming through the chat is truth and trust, truth and trust, truth and trust. Yes, we got a lot of input on this, checking, the meeting before the meeting that you have because you can't say what you really want to say, the career suicide that comes with admitting what's really happening. Even if it does lead to conflict, how can we make that conflict healthy and how can we get it resolved? The other high one is engagement. In terms of blind spots, I think we have a lot of passion on the line around the importance of engaging people in the story so that they can be part of what's going on in the organization. I think a lot of people here probably believe in the engaged difference that Jim talks about in his art of engagement. So that's what's going on, and it's all exciting. Knowing that, what would you guys like to spend your last few moments talking with the group about?
Well, maybe one quick final thought, right? As you think about all of that. Nelson Mandela was in jail for 28 years, fighting for equal rights, right? And he tells a story in his autobiography where he's boarding a plane, shortly after coming out of jail, and he has a South African black pilot, and he says, and I got nervous and uncomfortable. right? And so here's somebody who for 28 years fought for equality and found himself to have perceptions and unconscious biases that, you know, he had to come to grips with, right? And he became self-aware about, and he almost was shaking his head and like, you know, wow, you know, I went in jail for 28 years only to find out I have some of these myself. And in many ways, I think the lesson for all of us is, as we think about these blind spots, as we think about leadership, where do we maybe have a false sense of where our leadership is strong, or where do we have opportunity to get better as you think about engaging people and as you think about these blind spots? Because it's something that can easily happen, and that's not natural to any of us. And so those are some final thoughts. Jim, any other perspectives or thoughts?
No, I think maybe the only addition is that, you know, these unconscious or conscious blind spots are critical. You know, I think that if we don't do something about them as leaders, we will find that we continue to have 3/4 of our workforces not bringing the best version of themselves to work and to the adventures we go on. And I think that's sad, because if you look at some of the major challenges we face as society, cancer deaths are down almost 30%, traffic fatalities are down almost 30%. We've set our mind to it over the last 30 years and we've improved it. We've set our mind to engaging our people, but we've not improved it. So we must ask the questions, what are we doing that is not allowing the change in the way people show up to really be different and to be much more fulfilling for both our people and our organizations?
Great. And then I know, Rochelle, there was a question specifically to question 19. I don't want to get into too much detail, and we have a follow-up session too for folks who want to get into a 30-minute Q&A session in a couple of weeks. But maybe the guiding thought on that is, well, the vision statement is a good headline to your story, and we talked about some components that are really important. What's really most essential is the overall narrative, and is it compelling and understandable to your people, and does it create a sense of wanting to be a part of something larger than yourself, and does it create a sense of belonging? And all too often, our focus becomes on just one sentence that captures a vision that is only meaningful to a few and not the great many, where that needs to be a headline supported by a narrative that is compelling and exciting and that everybody wants to be a part of, or everybody chooses to be a part of consciously because they can't wait to go on that adventure. So, just to address that particular question.
So Jim and Rich, I just want you to know that there's a lot of gratitude in the chat for you guys opening the dialogue and having a connection with the people that were with us today. Lots and lots of appreciation, and they love the handout. So thank you.
So thank you so much. I am challenged in so many ways, as I'm sure our attendees are. So a couple of action items for those of you who are attending today's call. Obviously, we already included the link to the handout, and that will be in our follow-up email. In our follow-up email, we will have a recording as well, and we would invite you to share this recording with your colleagues and friends and others who might benefit from learning about the leadership blind spots. The final action item today is to go out and pre-order this book. What are your blind spots? And if you do so today, we have a form, and you can fill out the form. And when you pre-order the book and then fill out the form, we're going to give you an exclusive invitation to another webinar event with Jim and Rich on October 8th. And at that webinar event, it will be completely Q&A. So if you have specific questions that you would like to address, and if you'd like to open up your line and talk directly to Rich and Jim, we would invite you to that exclusive event. And the way to get invited is to pre-order the book and to fill out our form. So thank you so much to all of you who have participated. It's been amazing to see your engagement. And a kind of final follow-up would be, if you don't already know about Root and their organization and the great work that they do in the world, we'll include some links in our follow-up email so you can find out about the tremendous work that Jim and Rich and Root could do within your organization. So Jim and Rich, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.